All right, if people could start transitioning to your breakout session, and here is your official transition warning.
Transition. Transition. As well as tradition. Ever seen Fiddler on the Roof? You know what I'm talking about. Anyway.
Thank you.
All righty.
Thank you.
I had to think of something on the fly. You know what I mean, Bert. Okay. Okay, so what do I do next?
big room, which is really weird considering we just saw like a packed ballroom 10 minutes ago. First off, thank you for bearing with me as we start a little bit late. The being hungry was kind of more important. And I appreciate your patience because, you know, sometimes your body, you actually have to listen to it. That's part of advocating for yourself after all. For those of you who are here, this is Talking the Talk about autism, telling your story and navigating disclosure situations. And I do see Nikki taking a run. Okay, we have also been requested to ask the exhibitors and exhibits to head out. Visiting, sorry. We love our exhibitors. So we're talking about telling our own stories and navigating disclosure. I know that usually having an introduction feels a little, oh wait, is this even working? Let's see. I don't even know if our little clicker wants to do its thing. Okay, there we go. For those of you who don't know me and who might be joining us late or missed our lived experience panel this morning, I'm Haley. I am proudly autistic. I am an author, an artist, an advocate, and I'm very proudly autistic. I was originally a non-speaking kid, diagnosed at age 3. I am known as Florida's first openly autistic attorney, which I have a lot of mixed feelings about, but this isn't really the place for me to discuss them. But essentially, my mixed feelings are it is a privilege, and it's also something that should not be viewed as exceptional, and I do think there's plenty of other autistic people in the field. And for one reason or another, they have faced extra barriers or didn't feel safe sharing this information about themselves. And I guess I didn't care enough, so I shared. But that is a little bit about me. I also love to write, I love to talk, and I love getting people to care about inclusion and access. And really just trying to make things better for other neurodivergent people. That's kind of who I am and what I stand for. And outside of being here, I just tell people I am quietly just the biggest nerd you'll ever meet. I am someone who collects Pokemon cards. I play a lot of video games. I also have discovered in recent years that I really enjoy just collecting stuff, which is really evident by now the fact that I'm trying to downsize my life a little bit. So that's been fun. It turns out you end up collecting a lot of clothes. That's what I ended up learning in the last couple of years. It's been very humbling to go through that and realize how much I've accumulated. So without further ado, we're going to jump right in. I do want to talk about access before we do. And I know we have people joining us online, so this is mostly for a little bit of everybody, but mostly our online friends as well, as inclusion is something that is for everybody. It's not up to me to decide whether or not today is accessible. It's not up to our wonderful host to make that decision. It is a team sport. If there's something that you need from me or from the powers that be, please let us know. And I also do not care about what you are doing. I don't care if you're taking notes. I don't care if you're on your phone. I don't care if you stand up. I don't care if you leave halfway through the session. Like, I am not here to judge you. Everybody's brain and body works differently. So please do what feels best for your brain and your body. This is your time. And I also know that everybody learns and absorbs information differently. And as for slides, I am happy to share them with you. I do try to make sure that they are accessible for our blind and low vision folks as well, which is why we have this comment on alt text and screen reader accessibility. So kind of to jumpstart right away with disclosure, we're really talking about how we have all these different tools in our toolboxes that people use in order to share their disability status with others. And really that boils down to 3 major themes. This idea of receiving support, accommodations, and or acceptance. And when we talk about this, it usually seems pretty obvious of, okay, you have to disclose in certain and specific situations. But really I share this because we all have different perspectives and different roles that we play when it comes to disclosing. Is that you might be someone who feels that it has to be done no matter what. You might be someone who feels, there's only certain situations I feel comfortable with disclosing, or I don't think I ever want to do this. And no matter where you fall in this, or if you're just supporting a young person or somebody in their disclosure journey, there's a place for you here too. And I also like to think about when we are having these conversations because it can feel very awkward. It's not like I'm wearing a sign every day that says, "Hi, my name is Haley, I'm autistic." That's not really who I am, and I don't like to lead with that in most situations. Primarily because it is a huge part of my identity, but people take it as if it is my whole personality. If I am a little too open, that people just don't always understand, or they immediately just assume, okay, here's a characteristic that feels very important to you, therefore it's everything we need to know about you. But really, when we tell our stories and we share our disability status, there's a lot of different goals that people might have with this, that you might be trying to build or create or seek community. Or when it comes to things like support, you might be looking for help, more information. I know that's a big reason a lot of us come to conferences in the first place. We need guidance, we need solutions, advice, direction, and really just that idea of how do we feel less alone on this journey. I do not claim to speak for anybody but myself, but enough experience throughout this life has taught me that a lot of autistics in our families often do feel alone and isolated in some way, shape, or form. That people just don't understand what you're experiencing or what your loved ones are experiencing. And sometimes building that community of people who get it is one of the most powerful things we're able to do, or at least try to get others to empathize with us and care about what we are experiencing and trying to make things better for everybody. And usually when we talk about disclosure, there's always this concern that you have to do it no matter what. There's nothing legally that basically makes it that you have to disclose, like you don't have to be on some kind of registry. There's no kind of this needs to happen no matter how you slice it. But the big thing when we talk about disclosure is that if you do need accommodations or services to be successful in either work or school situations, you have to disclose in order to receive them. And the reason that is under the law, so whether it's the Americans with Disabilities Act or in particular the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act or IDEA, usually accommodations are granted to qualified individuals with disabilities. The way that this works is we don't know if you're qualified unless you tell us. So under IDEA, there's of course that whole process of what your disability falls under in order to receive special education services. And with the ADA, with that qualified individual language, how am I going to know if you're qualified unless you tell me? That is kind of the easy mode of legalese there. That I can't guess that you have a disability. I mean, I probably could if you're per se physically disabled in some way and you're using a mobility aid or whatnot, but if you don't tell me or I don't tell you, there's no way you're going to know, especially with certain things, or we might not know exactly what somebody needs or why they're sharing this. So it's really important that if it's like accommodations is the end all be all here, disclose, qualify yourself, and also you get that extra legal protection from making it known in that way that you are a person with a disability. And of course, every single situation that we're in is wholly unique. That how and when to disclose looks different with different people. I know this does sound very obvious, but the strategies and stories that we tell, depending on our audience, really is a thing. I used to often tell stories that the way I would disclose in job interviews and at work was very different than the way I would talk to my friends, which is also very different than the way that I would talk to somebody I had never met before and thought this was relevant information, or even if I was going to say, disclose on a first date. Is that the way that I would have those conversations looks so different. And that's really based on who I'm interacting with and also what the situation calls for. I'm not going to act the same on a first date as I will if I'm trying to get a job, even though you might be able to tell me, you know, Haley, a first date is basically no different than a job interview because you have to make somebody like you. But I would actually go as far to argue they're very, very different situations, and professionalism and likability are not always the same thing, but to each their own in those situations. And that really kind of helps shape where we're going with these conversations. And usually when we talk about these things, there's a bunch of different buckets that we fall into. And even when we think about the allies and family members and whatnot, how do we have these conversations? And who do I have these conversations with? And a lot of the time, I interact with family members who want to do the best possible thing by their children. And usually what happens, they're going, who do I tell? How do I tell people that I interact with and my kids interact with? Like, how do I have these conversations? And it's sometimes very awkward. it's something that you also have to really do a balancing act on your interests versus your kids' interests. So sometimes we think it might be the most important thing to share our stories as family members because we want support, we want to have that kind of empathy or something like that, but it might not be the right person because it might not be right for your kid. It might not be right for your privacy or their safety. I talk about this a lot when it comes to the internet in particular, because there's lots of people who like to share a ton of information on social media and talk about their kids. And I know that is a wonderful thing if you're someone who posts a ton of pictures. That is not me. But I know that sometimes I'm always like, okay, you got to make sure that it's, you're sharing with your intended audience, that you're not overstepping somebody's boundaries, all of these things. It might feel relevant to you to disclose in specific moments or on the internet, but it might not be as relevant to your young person. I mostly share about the internet because it's not a one and done thing. Things live online for a long time. And also other things that I like to kind of consider when we're talking about these things with family or just as kids is really our relationship with the people we're disclosing to and with. So I know for me, when I have to disclose on behalf of myself or other family, because I do have other folks in my life who are autistic or otherwise neurodivergent, I do consider my relationship with them. I think about what they feel comfortable with, what I can and can't share, what they feel comfortable with me sharing, and also who am I interacting with. That my relationship with, say, my child's teacher would be very different than my relationship with somebody at a grocery store because the child's having a meltdown, for instance. It might be irrelevant, one-sided, quick, oh my gosh, this is fine. There's not some kind of medical emergency here that you need to get healthcare or police or something involved. But the way that I would talk about that with teachers, for say, would be very different than that one-off, everyone's okay, we're safe, moving on. And the other things that are really big are things like potential support, that I know a lot of us are really seeking support more than anything else. That's the big thing. I know support's really important for a lot of us. Making sure that we are able to get that however feels possible is big because we want to have as many people who are accepting and loving around our families as we possibly can. Is that having this familial support is big. And even when we talk about this stuff with other family members, it can be sometimes uncomfortable and scary. I've had people ask me a lot about siblings. I am an only child, so I'm probably not the best person for sibling advice. But what I have learned over the years is what you share and how you share it makes a difference. That kids are usually very, very attuned to their environment. They know something is different about their autistic siblings more than likely. And it's how you share with them this information in a way that makes sense to them, depending on where in life everybody is. That might be a really big purpose, that you want them to have an understanding and know why your attention perhaps is divided, or why there's certain effort going into this child at a different time, all sorts of stuff like that. And of course, the biggest thing that I always try to push, especially when we have older kids as well, is about consent. I feel strongly about consent. I really think about this with the age of the internet more than anything else. And also kind of, there's no bright line rule on what you can and can't share about somebody else and their disability status. But I usually have what I consider my version of the bright line rule, which I actually got from a parent blogger who I'm a huge fan of. And her name is Jess Wilson. And Jess wrote at one point about her autistic daughter who was at the time going to be basically going through puberty. And a lot of people on the blog were asking her to share about her daughter's experiences with, body changes, menstruation, all this stuff. And Jess very smartly said no. And I remember thinking, I respect this decision entirely. And she elaborated, it's not that I don't want to help you and that I don't care and that this isn't important stuff to be talking about, and that there aren't people who are having those conversations. But it's not right for my family. And the way that I decided that wasn't right, because her daughter was largely someone who struggled to articulate her feelings and did have, I believe, some kind of other disability as well, that her bright line rule was, if I was X age and my parents shared this about me, how would I feel? And I think that's a very good thing, because I know a lot of us have parents that tend to overshare in some way, shape, or form. And how many of us have probably cringed when our parents have said stuff about us to other people? Like, I feel like that's a pretty universal experience of sorts, of your parents are like super proud of you, or they tell some really embarrassing story from when you were a little kid and you're just like, please shut up now, I'm scared, I hate this. So that is kind of the great bright line rule that I like to follow, is if I were their age, regardless of intellect or comprehension, how would I feel if my mom or dad said this about me? And when she applied that to something like puberty and talking about getting her period, she was like, I would be mortified if my mom talked about me getting my period when I was 12. And I was like, that is an extremely great point. And that is something I'm going to be thinking about and using when I have these kind of consent type situations. And not really and if you're not sure if it's okay, that's usually a great thing to follow, is just kind of put yourself in somebody else's shoes of that same age and decide what is and isn't something that feels smart, or at least relevant, or that might not be written in permanent marker on the internet, or just essentially set your child up for failure or embarrassment in some way, shape, or form. And then there's this other question that comes up, and this is probably the question I get asked the most in this life, is I have to have this conversation with my autistic child so they understand autism and know this about themselves. And I think that's a really great thing that happens, is we get asked all the time, what do I do? Why should I do this? I don't know if it's the right time. That's usually the stuff that I hear every single time that I talk about disclosure and geek out a little bit. But really, it's a good thing to have these conversations. You should not be hiding the 8-ball in any way, shape, or form about why you might be receiving special education services, or why there is a speech or occupational therapy appointment. Kids are smart. They know things. I knew I was different even though I didn't have the language for it, and there was only so long that my family could have convinced me that I was really cool and everybody else was really weird. There comes a point when you begin to realize there's something different about you. That really began for me when I realized I wasn't getting invited to the birthday parties and the trips and the other things that the other kids were doing. And there's only so many times you could just be like, oh, well, it's their loss for not inviting you. Like, you begin to kind of wisen up a little bit to the gig. So when I say that you already know you're different, there is that sort of self-awareness that ends up instilled in you anyway. And having extra language and understanding of why you're different can be really healing and also really empowering for a lot of us. That disability is not a bad thing. It's something that's just part of the human condition and experience. And it can be sometimes kind of validating to know why you act the way you act, or explain why you are the way you are. Disability identity is a journey in of itself. It's something that I feel like I've spent a long time navigating. I have known this about me since I was 9 years old, which is now 22 years of my life. And 22 years of knowing about autism, I've had quite the journey of, I want nobody to know. I never want to talk about this. This does not really feel like it means anything to me, or some scandalous secret that I could tell my friends and then they'll go gossip to everybody to, oh, hi, this is just what I do. This is a big part of who I am. And I have found community, and I genuinely care about autistic people. That's been a very long, steady evolution. And my views on disability, my views on my own self-esteem have changed. All sorts of things have changed having this knowledge, rather than kind of wondering, why am I not hitting the same milestones at the same time as everybody else around me? The same also goes with how we build that self-esteem and those self-advocacy skills. Is there's a lot of pressure on us to advocate for ourselves. And helping to alleviate that pressure and helping to really kind of equip us to keep moving forward is huge. I realized by knowing this about myself, I was able to do a better job advocating for myself. That I was able to say what my goals were. I was able to be included in IEP and 504 meetings. I was able to have these types of conversations, even if I didn't quite know what they were or what was happening, that even just being able to share what my goal was for the school year, because I knew why I was in the room, was still a really big step. And of course, that's really important, is you want to have that trust in your relationship. with your family members. And this is something I thankfully didn't have to experience, but I had friends who did. I actually had a friend whose parents did not tell him he was autistic until he turned 18 and decided he only needed to know because it was a relevant piece of medical history and information for him. Needless to say, that did not go over very well. And he was very frustrated, very angry, in denial, and spent up until at least his 30s or so saying he was cured and he was unhappy and this was a childhood mishap, essentially. And when I actually tried to have a balanced conversation, because I spend an awful lot of time in this community with him, he got very combative with me about it. He was just very upset that I was like, you are still autistic, dude. And it was very obvious and evident, and it was also why he was facing different challenges in his career and with his friends and other relationships. And it was because he didn't have that support and didn't have that self-awareness or knowledge. And really what happens as well is the flip side of that is the fact that kids know they're different and they're smart. Something that was touched on on the lived experience panel earlier is there's a lot more information and a lot more resources out there today than when those of us who are adults now were growing up. It is very easy to find information on autism, neurodiversity, or other disabilities, especially if you have questions, or the algorithm knows you better than you do and pushes that information at you. That information getting pushed at you is a very real phenomenon. I actually get pushed a lot of content on things and I'm like, this knows me better than I know me, which is really strange and creepy. But at the same time, having that deeper exploration is how a lot of people self-identify or come to realize that as adults, they should probably get tested or look into this deeper. And something else that has happened since once upon a time I used to do journalism. And once upon a time when I did journalism, I actually got to interview people about their stories and late diagnosis. I had more than one person who shared, I had a self-discovery journey in my adult life. I was in my 30s or my 20s or my 40s. I figured out I was autistic. It made the most sense. I went to a psychologist or a neurologist or whoever, and then I went back to my family. And I told them this information because I thought it would help explain some things. And I just remember sitting there the first time this happened going, okay, how did that go? And they go, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, we've known that since you were 5. They never shared it with this person. And needless to say, it completely fractured that relationship. So you want to be honest and upfront in order to not just preserve the relationship, but also it's a level of trust. And also it's a piece of information, whether you're like my friend's parents who viewed it as health information or just a piece of who they are and an explanation that can make an awful lot of sense and also really set those building blocks for that self-acceptance and advocacy. So how do we have these conversations then? If you're just thinking, okay, great, now I need to have one of these conversations, that seems a little bit scary. I'm not really sure how to do that. And essentially that comes down to the first principle. You're not hiding the information. The 8 ball's not being hidden. Whether it is just making it very easy to access in your house. So I knew what autism was before my parents actually sat me down. And this is because I was a kid who loved to read. And my favorite book series at the time was The Babysitter's Club. And The Babysitter's Club had at least one book where the babysitters were babysitting kids with disabilities. And one of them happened to be an autistic girl. And it happened to be on my bookshelf. Like, I'm pretty sure my mom must have bought it as a resource or to help jumpstart that conversation. I'm not quite sure. But I do think that was a very intentional choice considering there's what, like 100 plus Babysitter's Club books? And I don't know if I actually read every single one of them. But I do remember reading that book and hearing the word autism from that book and not quite understanding because the character didn't really have that much in common with me at the time, so I thought. She was non-speaking largely and had savant skills and was sent away to a residential special school essentially, but it was still enough that I had some kind of understanding. And now there's all sorts of really great stuff out there that isn't just a Babysitter's Club book that was written in the early 90s. That there's all sorts of cool picture books, there's all sorts of cool characters on TV. There's so much that information is out there anyway that it can make sense to someone. I know there's a show on PBS Kids now featuring an autistic kid or a raccoon or something of that nature. I know the show is called Carl the Collector. That's the only thing I know. I haven't gotten a chance to watch it yet. I usually do watch these things, but usually they stress me out because I'm always kind of ragging on the representation. So we can have a whole other sidebar conversation another time about how watching autism on TV makes me want to have a meltdown on any given day. But when we do have these conversations, I do want us to make things as appropriate and relevant as possible based on who we're dealing with, which means we might be thinking about their interests, their maturity level, their level of language and understanding, that we might not even just jump to saying something very clinical sounding. We might be using something that feels appropriate. That if you have someone who might just not be as understanding or aware, we might just say that your brain works differently. And this is how your brain works differently. And that might be just enough that you're going to understand as a young person what's going on. That even when I was first told about this outside of Harry Potter, what really made sense for me is we went through this workbook together that really kind of elaborated these strengths and weaknesses and getting to know your brain and your body a little bit better. I know this, I don't remember the name of it off the top of my head. It's been updated probably 1,000 times since the early 2000s. But it made sense for me, and going through it from that strengths-based concept approach really made sense of, okay, nothing is wrong with me, but I understand that I do need more time to process things. I understand that I am very empathetic and overly sensitive, or so it seems. Like, all that was making sense to my 9-year-old self. And we also know that curiosity is real. I am not someone who asks a lot of questions because I don't know how to always get them out of my mouth, but I always am curious about something, which means it's up to us to have the best information we can, to be as accurate as we can. If we don't know the answer, it's okay not to know the answers. I know we feel like we have to have all the answers, and it's okay not to. That I have asked plenty of questions that I will never know what my answer is going to be. Just like you might ask me a question and I might not have a good answer for you today. That's all right too. And really we want to presume competence, so we want to assume that our young people will be understanding and have the potential to understand things unless we are given information that suggests otherwise. I really am a fan of this across the board in all disability concepts, is I don't like being assumed that I don't understand things immediately. It's been a consistent struggle in my adult life and career, is getting talked down to or infantilized in some ways if I totally don't get things just because someone hears the word autism and immediately jumps to the same, that is the exact same thing as you're deaf, you have an intellectual disability, you just don't get it. So people will either start speaking really slow or really, really like, oh my gosh, I'm so proud of you. Meanwhile, we're having an intelligent conversation about something else. Like, come on. Is please presume competence. And the other thing that's really big, and this is something that I think went really well in my life, is having disability being almost a normalized thing in your house. This was normalized for me primarily because my grandmother had MS and my mom also had other health-related issues. So having and growing up around healthcare stuff and other diagnoses and disabilities was something that I didn't think anything was weird about it. And when I say to normalize it, usually when we do have that natural curiosity about anything in disability world, we try to shut it down. When we shut it down, it can be as simple as you see someone who is using a wheelchair or something, and we tell someone not to stare or ask questions. But if we normalize it, we could just be like, well, maybe his legs don't work that well. Just something simple to normalize it, like it's not something to be afraid of. If we're telling someone don't stare, don't ask questions, look away, we're making it seem like something to be feared. We don't want this as something to be afraid of. We want to be as affirming as possible too. That's the other big thing that I think went really, really well for me growing up too, is that nothing was wrong with me. I did not grow up believing I was broken or a failed version of normal. I really grew up thinking that this was something good, that this was some form of professional superpower, essentially. And this is something that I can manage and accept about myself because there's more strengths than not. I already knew everything that was difficult for me, but I didn't know just how many of my strengths were related to the autism too. and allow that space to keep growing and be curious and have these conversations as an ongoing thing. That was my first foray into understanding autism, was through Harry Potter and going through kind of a little bit of a baby self-discovery journey. But there's also questions that I had and answers that I didn't know I needed that I didn't find until I got way older. I didn't know that having no sense of hunger cues and whatnot was an autistic experience, for instance. And I wish I had known that at a different point in my life, but I just didn't know, like, oh, I don't get the body cues until like I'm ready to eat somebody's hand. That's like an actual thing for me. I wish I had known that, but that's also things that come with time. And if I had explained that, I don't know if I would have gotten an answer. I just didn't know. And that's something very normal, is we don't know what we don't know, and that's okay. You don't have to have all the answers. You can always come back later, or you can encourage their curiosity and exploration as well. And also when we have different tools in our toolbox, that goes a long way too. I know, as much as TV stresses me out, it's a really good way to introduce people who share that same kind of neurotype or who are also autistic to them. I did not have that luxury as a young person, but it's something that has been very helpful for me when I explain now to people who don't know or have that familiarity with autism as well. Because naturally their first thing to do to me now is go, have you seen Love on the Spectrum? That is a very natural like reaction of the neurotypicals now. Hi, I'm autistic. Oh, have you seen Love on the Spectrum? Like, thanks guys, that was extremely helpful. Really appreciate the reaction there. Really, really, really here for it. But that kind of touch point to them and to a lot of people makes sense, whether it's children or just other people in your life, is that it might just be like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. You're like so-and-so on the show. Mm-hmm. Got it. Moving on. And also, if you have autistic friends, and I say this very kind of matter of fact, and it sounds funny, but make friends with your local autistic adults if you can, if you know any. If you have any autistic friends, please make friends with us. We are awesome friends. And be friends with us because you actually like us. We are funny, we are loyal, we have so much to offer, and not just because you want us to somehow mentor your kid. Like, we are just fun people to be around. My life is better for all the autistic people in my life. And as your friendly local autistic adult, I have a lot of friends who are parents of autistic kids, and they are neurotypical parents. They are some of my favorite people on the planet. And it has also made things easier for their kids to realize, like, oh, I'm not the only person in the world who has this. Of realizing, like, oh my gosh, mom's friend so-and-so, okay. Like, it's not just me. And they seem, happy and well-adjusted and life is good over there. So that's always a fun thing to kind of share. So make a friend. It benefits everybody. I promise it benefits you, it benefits your kids, and it benefits your local autistic people who are just happy to have friends too. So kind of a quick little PSA to go make some friends. Go make some friends here. I encourage you all to make a friend today, if you can. And that also kind of explains a little bit of this. And this is exactly how I felt, like that moment when it all just clicked and made sense. And with that moment where things clicked and made sense at 9, I just remember thinking this was awesome because I was told that different was neither better nor worse. It's just different. And different can be extraordinary. Recognizing that has been really monumental for me. And I realized the other thing that happened, and that does happen, is this explanation that I got was not really, really, really technical. A lot of us are scared to have conversations about disability and autism because we're afraid we're not going to use the right language and words. I spend most of my time actually teaching corporate America about neurodiversity, and corporate America is afraid to go anywhere near it because they're afraid of saying the wrong thing. So this is me putting my little corporate hat on for the moment, is you do not have to have the right vocabulary per se to be a good ally. I am pretty sure that my family did not know the word neurodiversity until I started yapping about it for a living. And that is okay. My parents were still fantastic allies. They didn't need to have that language. They didn't have to really know what the right words were, like there was some magic spell that would be cast if they said the right words to be good at doing the thing. These are the same people who also grind my gears every time they say special needs. And I have lots of people in my life who do that, and they'll just be like, oh, you're a special needs person. And I sit there wanting to rage, because if there's one way and one hill that I'm going to die on, it is if you say I have special needs, because my needs are not special. They're just human. I might need extra support, but I don't think my needs are special for being things that people need. But I have lots of people in my life who will still say stuff like that, even though being around me for a long time, they know better. But that doesn't mean that they're not good allies because they grind my gears every time they say special needs. They still will walk the walk, even if they are a little bit behind language-wise in my book, but they will still be the ones who advocate with me or for me, or who want things to be more inclusive and really make that effort, even if something else doesn't seem like it's there. And I know that's sometimes really hard for people, is they're gonna be like, oh no, I said the wrong thing, I'm going nowhere near this. But you can still say the quote unquote wrong thing or not know what to say, but your actions are the loudest thing that you have and the voice that we're really listening to, because it's the people who really make that effort and who really are practicing inclusion that do it the best. Not always the ones who repeat some social justice magic spell of word salad and hope that it is more accepting than not. A lot of language is sometimes one of those weird things that I feel like just is dressing things up one way or another without much to back it up. That you could still put a pig in a ball gown and it's still a pig, is how I feel a lot of the time when people are like, I got all the words right, but why am I not getting the acceptance reaction thing? It's like, because you still basically, you just put lipstick on it. It's still the same thing. You did not change your intent, your actions, your efforts. So that's the stuff that matters the most, and that's what I've learned throughout this journey as well. And also now kind of want to shift gears a little bit to chat about our self-advocates and how we're going to be disclosing and how we're having these tough conversations. And a lot of them do revolve around our own identity and acceptance journeys, our employment prospects and workplace, our friends, families, and relationships as well, and of course, school. So how are we going to get through all this types of stuff? And really, when we think of disclosing, it is an inherently personal decision. And there's so many reasons people don't do it, even though we feel like it's a very obvious thing to do because of accommodations and services and access. But people don't do it for a bunch of different reasons. People will and can perceive you differently. They might see you as receiving special treatment if you're getting an accommodation. They might look at you as less than or weaker. That was something that happened a lot in my professional life, is opposing counsel would always think it was some kind of weakness to be exploited. And I realized if opposing counsel didn't know, it meant things went better in litigation, because they didn't look at it as, oh, they can just take advantage of me, or that I'm less competent for some awful reason. There's also this fear of being a burden, of maybe not having your own piece in your disability identity. All this is ableism stuff that I could be here all day unpacking. But of course, there's also pre-existing stereotypes and the potential for discrimination, that if you do share that you're autistic. So the pre-existing stereotypes are what got me the most in my adulthood, is that people would always make these assumptions about who I was and what I was good at and enjoyed just based on a diagnosis. Is people would say things like, oh my gosh, you're probably so good at math and technology. I was not. I was someone who went to law school to avoid doing that stuff. But it was always assumed I would be great at those things, and I was not. And it always meant that I felt like I had to live up to some kind of stereotype, even if it was a positive stereotype. Because there's a lot of positive stereotype, at least in the workplace, of that you are really efficient, you're really loyal, you're really gifted in these specific areas. And when you don't live up to that in some way, shape, or form, it can feel like a personal failing, even though somebody else is going off of a stereotype. And there's also concerns about what is professional and licensing. I know many people who, per se, want to enter the Army or the military of some sort, or even something that requires disclosures of mental health diagnoses. There's this fear that you might be seen as less competent, or it might stand in your way of getting licensed. That's a big reason people don't share as well. And also for our self-advocates, it's really figuring out how to shape your narrative. Is knowing your who, what, when, where, and why is really big. And also how you have these conversations influences how other people react. The first time I decided to tell a friend I was on the spectrum, I was about 12. And I was excited and nervous, and I didn't have the understanding I do, obviously, by now. And the first time I had that conversation, I was very nervous. I was also making it out to be a much bigger deal than it was. And I treated it almost like it was some kind of scandalous secret because I just didn't know what to do with this information, but I thought it was important. And it did not go well. That the way that I was kind of nervous and essentially blowing it up made my friend think something was very, very wrong. And I'm pretty sure she also thought that it was terminal, the way that I was very afraid, talking about like a terminal illness or something. And I realized that fear came from me, not because she didn't know or she knew something else outside of it, but I was essentially the representative of the cause at the time, and I ended up making her afraid. And then I've also had disclosures where I will make a note in passing, like, oh my gosh, I'm autistic, this is so overwhelming, or I'm too autistic for this, and I'll just like laugh about it with my friends whenever there's something really, really sensory. And that is sometimes enough that they know exactly why I'm saying that, and they just move on. It's not a big deal. Nobody cares because I was super chill about it. They just don't care, and everybody moves on with their life. That usually is what works well for me, as I know is if I make it a big deal, somebody else will make it a big deal. And there are times I do need to make it a big deal. Like if I'm advocating for accommodations at work, because I too have rights. And making sure that my civil rights aren't being violated is a much bigger deal than making sure my friends are understanding as to why I don't want to be in certain situations. So really figuring out how to shape your narrative and even how you choose to talk about yourself is really big. And that's also very context dependent as well as to how people react. And most people generally are at least curious. When people are curious, that is usually not a bad thing. I always say when it comes to curiosity, as long as your curiosity is respectful, I am fine with it. I have boundaries like most people do. I also appreciate when people ask questions, but they also know that they might not get an answer because I don't feel comfortable or it's just not appropriate, but I'd rather them at least have that natural curiosity, or that they're just gonna be supportive, thank me for letting them know, or they're just gonna think nothing of it and move on with their day and be accepting anyway. As for the mean or unreceptive people, I'm extremely grateful for them. I know that sounds kind of counterintuitive, but when I disclose earlier on in my social life or something else, it helps the trash take itself out, that I don't have to be the one who has to figure out somebody's intentions or character down the line. This was especially true when I was single, by the way, and I had probably one of the worst dating app experiences of all time. And I love telling this story because it's exactly what a bad disclosure looks like. And I'm very open. I was telling this guy at the time, like, hey, I'm on the spectrum, like, can we go somewhere quiet for our first date? Because, you know, I'd like to actually get to listen to you and not get too overwhelmed. I thought that was a very simple way to get that out in the open, a very easy mode disclosure, and it would make sense and it wouldn't be too much of a fight to get to go to a quieter restaurant and not to some like noisy bar. Anyway, homeboy over here blows up at me, and he goes on a tirade about how his medical school roommate was on the spectrum, and it was the worst experience of his life, and he wants nothing to do with autistic people after such a negative experience. And I was just like, okay, I'm glad I didn't waste my time on a date or 2 dates or 3 dates with this guy. Like, that's literally how I felt about this when it was going on. I was offended and freaked out, and he then sends me a message probably about 2 weeks later asking if I want to hook up with him. And I was like, you can go get lost. You already took yourself out the first time. You can go back to the dumpster you came from. Like, that's how I feel about when people are mean or unreceptive. I know that's kind of an extreme, but all of us have some kind of story of somebody who doesn't get it, doesn't want to get it, or already has a preconceived notion. And when the trash takes itself out, you need to be thankful for it. It saves us a lot of time and a lot of effort, and I would have had a much bigger, stronger reaction had I actually gone out with this dude. Even for one dinner, I would have cared a lot more than somebody on a dating app telling me they want nothing to do with me. I'm just saying, that's something I always like to bring up when we have these kinds of conversations, and people can be unreceptive or cruel for no good reason, but it's something that you realize you don't want these people in your community and your circle of people you care about and who care about you. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about friends and family for a little bit too. And this is especially true if you are someone who is late discovered or diagnosed, or you are identified or diagnosed. I know that's something that in the community kind of gets to a little bit of a debate about, or can be viewed as controversial. But if you're someone who is coming to this yourself in later life, or you have the suspicion this might be you, and you don't think your family, your caregivers, or someone important to you knows that you're autistic, there's a couple things you could do. And this also might be a way that you're able to suss out some more information to see if this is the journey you want to pursue with a psychologist or somebody else, or if you want to even share a little bit further and you are actually officially late diagnosed medically, is using facts to back up your story. Not the like, oh, I think I might be autistic because I took some quiz on the internet. As in, like, I've been doing a lot of research, I've been thinking back on my childhood, I realized I did X, Y, and Z, and these things aligned, and as long as it's very by the book, I think it makes a lot more sense. And that's also when I know a lot of late and self-diagnosed people will ask questions about things they don't remember from when they were a kid, because again, autism's developmental. We start seeing things when we're little kids. And if you don't know your childhood that well, it's usually a safe way to start asking questions and poking around. This actually is something that I've seen a couple of times, and one of my friends did this, and I remember talking to one of my friend's moms, and her mom was literally telling me stories about my friend as a little kid, and I was just sitting there like, and how do you not realize your child is autistic? Like, this is a grown adult, figured it out herself, hadn't had the conversation with the family, and then was telling me some story about sensory needs and clothes on a 3-year-old, and I was just like, you couldn't put 2 and 2 together, but okay. And I'm like, hey, guess what? It looks like your childhood confirms what you already know, in case you didn't remember this story, but your mom told me this story about you, and like, we were just laughing about it for a good 20 minutes. It was something to do with like tags and shirts, I think it was. And this is also might look a little bit different if you are someone who's living at home and having that self-discovery, and you started kind of going down your own journey, that you also don't want to perhaps make it be awkward or uncomfortable, but you might do a little bit of searching and soul searching. You might also be trying to talk to people at school, like a counselor or someone else as well. The other things that I like to do is when I do want to share something that feels big, such as autism related, or any other kind of big relevant information like this, is find a good time where people are calm. I know for the adults in the room, usually sometimes the only times you see your family members is at holiday gatherings or family events like weddings. It can feel like the easiest time to do it because everybody's in the same room. But chances are there's a lot of other stuff and moving parts going on that probably your, hey, by the way, I'm autistic announcement is not best at Thanksgiving dinner. That you might want to wait until everybody's calm, or just try to ask everyone like, hey, there's something I want to talk to y'all about. Is there a time that like everybody like, can we talk about this later when, you know, everything's the dust settles a little bit? And really setting that tone for how you want to frame it is big. If you have that, this is really urgent sense of urgency in your approach, it does kind of give the, oh no, what did I get into? And it also sets that same kind of panic mode for a reaction. I know lots of us are a little bit of, this does feel urgent in our brains, so we will externalize the fact it seems urgent. And if I came to my family with some urgent seeming announcement, they're gonna assume I'm in trouble, I'm pregnant, or something really, really big and that could be absolutely world-shattering, when perhaps something like this might not be absolutely world-shattering for them. Just something to be thinking about. Same with our friends and romantic partners, that you can make it out like it's earth-shattering, or you could just be like, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and have those conversations be ongoing. You're still always getting to know each other. You might not know what is a sensory issue or something else, and really setting those boundaries in those conversations is huge too. I don't know all the answers either. If you are telling people who might be new to this, it's okay if you don't have all those answers, or you don't feel comfortable answering every single question. And autism is a big word. It is a big diagnosis or discovery, and it takes time to process it. Everybody has a different timeline here. I know for me, it didn't take a lot of time to process. I was young enough that I don't think I thought too heavily about it. But I do think if I were older, I might have spent a lot more time kind of sitting with it before reacting, or I might not have had that conversation as readily. I know plenty of people who will take time. They might seem upset. They might seem kind of nervous. They might be all sorts of things. I know lots of families who they've said that they needed time because they were upset because they feel like they missed something, that they should have picked this up sooner. That how did I not know? Did I fail my family? All sorts of things like that can be a huge time. Kind of, I need time to process this because it could be overwhelming and scary. But also a lot of us want to be advocates, and I am so grateful for so many of us who do self-advocate and tell your story. As a lot of us do want to do this and are very proud. I love getting to tell my story, but really kind of having some ideas if you are telling your own story is really setting those boundaries. I know that sounds very obvious, and I honestly wish that I could just do an entire talk on boundaries and people pleasing and what have you, because I know a lot of us want to be helpful as much as we can, and we want people to like us. But decide what you do and don't want out in the open. So things that I feel very strongly about in my boundaries is I try to keep, even though I do have a public presence on autism education and stuff, I do try to keep a lot of my personal life just to myself. I don't want people knowing things like where I live, for instance, or I don't want people knowing when I'm not home. I don't want people knowing certain struggles of mine because I just don't feel like I want that to be relevant. I don't want my whole medical history out there. And I know people will come up to me at these things, they'll ask about medications or what have you, and I'm like, that's not something I feel comfortable advocating about in public. And really telling your story your way is big. That so many other people have tried to tell my story for me that it's made me uncomfortable. That I've seen my story get told as this very, once upon a time you were nonverbal and now you're a lawyer, and I always feel uncomfortable with it because that's not how I would tell my own story. Is really tell the story you want to tell in the way that you feel comfortable telling it. That it needs to feel authentic to you if you're going to really share your whole story. And really making friends and building community is a big reason people tell their stories too. And really developing a sense of pride and self-esteem in that identity of realizing, if I tell my story, I don't feel like I have something to be ashamed of. I feel like people will understand me better. Everybody has their own reason as to why this feels important to them. And really keeping that in mind can be a big part of that journey as well. I do want to chat about workplace stuff for a little bit too. When it comes to workplace disclosure, there's kind of two ways this goes down. Is you have people who hint at disability and don't actually confirm it, and you can't deny it. So you might mention you're part of a disability group or an affinity group. Think about this if you have ever been part of a club and you mentioned you're a member of the club. We don't know why you joined the club. Are you an ally? Are you a member of that group? We don't know, but you're part of the club. Cool. Or people will do what my favorite thing, and I do this a lot actually, is they ask for support very vaguely. They might be like, I do best when you give me clear instructions. They might never mention disability, but they might still be requesting help in some way, shape, or form. While others will precisely mention, I'm autistic. They'll do it in their application materials. They'll do it to an HR person, their boss, whoever they're interviewing, what have you. Or they actually just request an accommodation that they're legally entitled to under the law. And that also kind of brings us back to when people feel that they have to disclose and volunteer a disclosure at work. Is usually people feel that they're boxed into it if they need accommodations, they are suffering with their breakdowns in communication and performance, they figured this out themselves and decide it's relevant, or you're constantly self-accommodating and adapting and it's no longer working. I have been guilty of all of these different things and felt that I had to talk to somebody no matter what. But most of the time now, I just volunteer to disclose. I don't really care. I do view my neurodivergence as a strength to some extent. I also like to limit misunderstanding, and I take pride in who I am as well. That's a big part of it for me, and I know that's a big part of it for many others as well. And of course, many of you have to create space. A lot of us are allies. A lot of us are trying to figure out why people share information with us. And if you are an ally and someone is sharing information with you, it's important to figure out the why. So is someone looking for an accommodation? Is it something they think to share because it's fun? They want to be open and honest with you. But the other big thing that I always say is kind of a parallel here is figure out who else knows this information. Mostly because you want to know if you can help advocate with them. You don't want to out someone. I feel like this is a very similar parallel to your LGBT friends as well, is you don't want to per se out someone if they don't feel comfortable with that or they don't want someone else talking about their disability. So just ask who else knows, and if you are going to say advocate with them or for them, ask if it's okay before you do anything, and really just listening and responding with empathy. It's vulnerable to talk about disability for a lot of us. It's kind of scary. This is often our most vulnerable quality, or the thing that people will treat us differently for. And sometimes the kindest thing you could do is just ask how you could support them. I love when people ask me how they could be more supportive, or if there's anything they can do, or if they just simply move on. I always feel awkward when I disclose and somebody makes some kind of offhand comment like, oh, well, my brother has that. Or, have you tried yoga? Like, people will say the weirdest things when you disclose. And it really makes it an awkward and uncomfortable situation for us. And it makes me regret it almost every time that happens. So I always am grateful for people that just really want to figure out the why and to do something that really shows that they care and are listening. That's sometimes the best thing you can do, is be a good listener and to really care about one another. And I know that disclosure is something that feels thorny and kind of awkward and a little bit scary sometimes. I know that I believe we either have a little bit of time. I was trying to keep us on time as best as I can. And I also see folks are coming back to wander around. So if you want to go wander around, stretch your legs, all that good stuff, go for it. If not, then we can stay for questions and have a chat. Or if you want to say hello to me outside of the conference, you're more than welcome to do that. You can say hello to me via email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever makes you happy. I'm going to be around for the next round of breakouts to do this exact same thing for the next group. And I also am moderating our next panel as well. So please feel free to say hello to me throughout the day. I'm looking forward to keeping these conversations going, and I thank you all for being here.
So we are actually at time, so we won't have time for questions right now, but feel free to check out the vendors, have a bio break, and then we'll start breakouts here in a few minutes.